Hey guys, it's Courtney and welcome back. Today is day number 6 of my 7-day card series for Mother's Day. Today I'm using 2 stamp sets by Honeybee Stamps. The first is Spring Blossoms, and for my sentiment I'll be using Best Parents. For the flowers, I wanted to kind of make a cluster here in the lower right hand corner. So I'm using Simon Says Stamp masking paper to mask as I stamp along and just create a cluster with the leaves, the flowers, and the buds. I'm stamping on Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock using Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink because I will be Copic coloring these blossoms. Before removing the masks for my flowers, I decided I wanted to create a border here. So I'm using the grid mat to line up some post-it note tape around the edges of the cardstock. And I'll be using my ink blending tool to add Tattered Rose Distress Oxide inks all over the center of the card panel. I'm using a Cricut pen here just to create my lines of where the distress ink starts and where the border of the card ends. I decided I wanted to break up that background just a little bit, so I splattered on some clean water and just dabbed that up with a paper towel. Now I should have let this dry for a minute before removing the rest of my masks. Sometimes when the masks get damp, they can tear your paper a little bit. And on this one bud, you'll see that it did tear the paper. Also, sometimes it just leaves a little bit of the adhesive behind, which you can rub off with your finger once it's dry. For the Copic coloring, I decided I was going to make these flowers really, really bright. So I'm starting with my lightest pink, which is an RV11, and as I always do, just laying out where my darkest areas will be. I'm going to be adding yellow to the flowers at the end, but I decided just to do all my shading with the pinks themselves, the RV markers, and then add the yellow at the very end. Once I had my lightest color down, I went on to my darkest color, which is an RV17, and just with some flicking motions, I added shading to the center of the flower as well as the edges of the petals. Once my darkest color was laid out, I went to my mid-tone pink color and just extended those flicks just a little bit more. Once I had all my pinks down, I added just a little bit of yellow going from the center of the flower out, but not all the way to the edge of the petal. I colored all my flowers the same way, including that one that tore the paper a little bit. I just didn't over blend that area just because I was afraid of bleeding, but in the end you couldn't really tell. For my leaves and stems, I'm using a few YG markers, and I'm concentrating on the darkest areas to be in the center of the leaves, as well as that little area where the leaf is kind of folded over on itself. And I'm using the same technique. I'm starting with my lightest color, going to my darkest, then my mid-tone, and then back to my light color. I'm also coloring the center of the flowers the same way. added a white gel pen just to the stamen of those flowers to make them pop out a bit. And for my sentiment, I'll be using the Best Parent stamp set, also by Honeybee Stamps. And here I'm just testing my area here just to make sure that the Distress Oxide ink is completely dry and I won't have embossing powder stick to areas where I don't want it to stick. I treated the rest of the panel with an anti-static tool, and I lined up the Happy Mother's Day from the stamp set onto an acrylic block. Usually when I line up separate sentiments to create one sentiment, I do just stamp off just to make sure that everything looks good and everything is lined up before I actually stamp it on my card. So I'm just going to take that intense black ink and stamp it on my scrap paper here just to make sure everything is lined up. Next, I stamp that with VersaFine Onyx Black ink onto my card panel, and I'll be heat embossing that with clear embossing powder. Last, I took a Spectrum Noir sparkle pen just to add a little bit of shimmer to a few of those flowers and popped that on an A2 card base and called that one done. Thanks so much for stopping by, and come back tomorrow for my final day of my Mother's Day card series. Have a great day.